All right, hello everyone and welcome to Misinformation and the Election in Pennsylvania, a What to Expect 2020 Town Hall. My name is Grace Linzer and I'm on the National Outreach team at PEN America. For anyone who's not familiar with PEN America, I just want to give you a brief introduction to our work. So for over 100 years, PEN America has stood at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression in the United States and worldwide. Today, in the midst of a global pandemic and an unprecedented election, PEN is continuing this fight through the What to Expect 2020 campaign, which aims to combat the surge of disinformation and misinformation that poses a threat to our free and fair elections. So this effort includes disinformation defense workshops, community-level virtual town halls, and events with journalists and organizers at the local level like this one tonight. And a wider variety of other resources that you can check out at pen.org, that's pen.org. And there you can check out our tip sheet on how to talk to your friends and family who share misinformation. You can take our interactive quiz to test your election disinformation knowledge, and you can learn more about how you can spot, check, and stop disinformation. So I want to thank you all for joining us here tonight and give special thanks to our speakers, Ashley, Adam, and Jonathan, for taking time out of their busy schedules to share this hour with us. And many thanks, of course, to our moderator for this evening, Susan Phillips. So as a reporter, Susan tells stories about the consequences of political decisions on people's everyday lives. She has worked as a reporter for WHYY since 2004, covering politics, including the 2008 presidential primary. And in 2010, she produced an award-winning series on Pennsylvania's natural gas rush called The Shale Game. She received a 2013 Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Journalism Award for her work covering natural gas drilling in Pennsylvania. She has also won several Edward R. Murrow Awards for her work with State Impact. In 2013 and 14, she spent a year at MIT as a Knight Science Journalism Fellow. She has also been a Metcalf Fellow, an MBL Logan Science Journalism Fellow, and reported from Marrakesh on the 2016 climate talks as an International Reporting Project Fellow. So thank you very much, Susan, for joining us here tonight, and I will pass it off to you to get us started.
Thanks, Grace. Thanks for everyone who's joining us tonight. We're going to get started with Ashley Session. She's the Director of Civic Engagement and Partnership at the Committee of 70. And this is a nonpartisan civic leadership organization that advances representative, ethical, and effective government in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania through citizen engagement and public policy advocacy. And they've been around for a very long time, do great work. And Ashley is sort of our resident expert here on all things voting in Pennsylvania. So if you have any questions for her, you can always put them in the chat, and then we're going to move on to our two journalists. But right now, let's hear from Ashley, and she's got a great slide presentation for us tonight.
Hi everyone. I'm going to share my screen so you all can see the PowerPoint. So We Vote at Home is an initiative with the Committee of 70, as well as the League of Women Voters. With the Committee of 70, I serve as the Director of Civic Engagement and Partnerships, and with the League of Women Voters, Philadelphia, they're more of a grassroots organization while nonprofit, and I serve as the policy chair there. So just focusing on just legislation and how we can push things forward year round. So again, the Committee of 70 is extremely old. Well, we've been around for a while, and then we know that the League of Women Voters was created as a result of the push for the 19th Amendment to be ratified in August of 1920. We just reached our 100-year mark. So what you'll learn today, and I'll quickly run through these and do a broad overview on who's on the ballot, what's on the ballot, tools for learning about the candidates, how to apply for vote by mail, and then how to cast your ballot in person or at home, right? So the screen's a little janky, but this is Carrie Chapman Catt. She was the founder of the League of Women Voters. I would be remiss, and I always make sure I note this, that the suffrage movement did not include women of color, right? They benefited from the labor of women of color, but it wouldn't be until 50 years later that women of color would have the right to vote. And so we don't take that for granted, and we understand at the Committee of 70 just how important that work is. And I think everybody now is paying attention, although we have an election every 6 months here. We very, very much know how important democracy is and what our vote looks like. And at the Committee of 70, we are committed to transparent government and kind of peeking behind the curtain on what's happening. So here is a peek, right? In 2019, before anybody knew what we were walking into in 2020, the state legislature actually approved voting by mail. So this happened in 2019. And the thought was that we would ease into voting by mail as a state, right? There will be small campaigns around it. No one expected that we had to stand up a fully functional vote by mail program, or in addition to a fully functional in-person election. But here we are, and that's what we're doing. Everyone registered in Pennsylvania is eligible to vote by mail. You don't need a reason. I believe we are one of 42 states where you do not have to give COVID-19 as a reason. You can still vote absentee. That is a special circumstance. If you're overseas, if you have a disability, read the fine print. But voting by mail, you do not have to give a reason. Now, new things that have happened. Obviously, a ballot has to be used to only have to be received by 8 p.m. on November the 3rd. But now, thanks to a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision that's come down about a month ago at this point, as long as your ballot is postmarked by November 3rd, it can be received by November 6th. And of course, it can be sent by mail or completed at a satellite election office or dropped off at one of the boxes. Those boxes in Philadelphia specifically are at Front and Spring Garden and at City Hall. So what's predicted for November? These are some of our top concerns, right? A strain on county election offices and processing massive mail-in voting volume, large demographic gaps in the use of mail-in voting, especially by race and political affiliation, and just obviously a widespread confusion among voters. We have new poll workers here in the city of Philadelphia, across the nation, everywhere, with late changes and mis and disinformation. So, important deadlines. We are less than a week away from the last day to register to vote. You can request your ballot up until October 27th. I highly advise against it. Request it today, or go to a satellite election office if you're in Philadelphia County and request it. And then the general election is November 3rd. Register to vote, folks. Make sure you're a U.S. citizen, be a resident of Pennsylvania, and then at least 18 years of age. VotesPA.com is the state website. That's where you can find how to register. Check your registration. Even if you think you're registered, just double check for good measure. Check every single day so that you are sure. So in-person voting on November 3rd, a lot has been done, and I'll talk a little bit more about vote by mail. But what will in-person voting look like on election day? So this is actually Philly. You see our infamous, wonderful pieces of paper that we now have to feed into our machines. You will be socially distanced. In Philadelphia, we have 1,703 precincts. All precincts will be fully operational, but they will not be at their actual polling locations. Now, you will not see the massive cuts like we saw in the primary as a result of Act 77. The majority of the polling places, upwards of a little bit over 700, will be open on election day. And while you may be voting with other divisions in your building, the divisions will not be combined, right? So I know personally, I vote out of a garage. That's not happening. I've been moved to a church, right? So just know, like, things like that are happening. And when they're condensed that way, it's usually if you're voting out of garage or out of like a lodge or a smaller area that really can't handle the social distance measures that need to happen. We're going to ask you to pack your patients. That's a lot of what I'm saying. Pack the patients, pack a mask, pack some snacks, and know that you will have to social distance. You'll ask to keep windows and doors open. The poll workers are being trained to do this as well. Masks are being asked. They aren't required. You cannot force a person to wear a mask, but there will be tons of masks. There will be a number of organizations out and about ensuring that there's enough PPE to secure and to make sure that everybody feels safe. So all poll workers must wear PPE, and all eligible voters can vote. even if non-compliant with COVID safety. So there will be that one person who doesn't wear a mask. Just stand 12 feet or 15 feet away from them, but they still can vote, okay? So what happens if your mail-in ballot didn't arrive? You can vote provisionally. So there's a lot of questions, and I'll jump into this a little bit, but I wanted to really just be clear about, like, a provisional ballot is the actual last thing that is counted. It is not counted until they can verify that you haven't actually submitted a mail-in ballot. This is how it's always been done. This is how you eliminate fraud. And it is the last thing counted once they realize you have not voted on a machine. So it's actually like a pink piece of paper that you get, and you'll get that after they've checked all these boxes to make sure that you haven't voted anywhere else. So 3 myths about vote by mail. We kind of took these top surveys in like August, and we found that some of this stuff is still true and that people are worried. Voting by mail will lead to voter fraud. In Oregon, they've been doing this for about 20 years at this point, primarily vote by mail in their state. 100 million ballots, and about 12 have been found to be fraudulent. And that could be from like signature matches or people not filling out something right. It wasn't that they tried to vote twice or something like that. Voter fraud is extremely rare, and there are a number of systems within our voting system that have always been in place that people are now paying attention to that just aren't going to change because everybody's paying attention. So it's really, really hard. If you want to track your ballot, you'll go to votepa.com. If you have a ballot, you turned it in, some of you have begun to receive like a scan that it's begun to be processed. It has not been counted. Do expect another email. Myth 2, sorry, mailing my ballot will increase the risk my vote won't count. As long as you fill it out properly, like I said, there is a scanner and a tracker that is scanned every time it's actually processed or moved through part of the voting system, and you can follow it along. 3, vote by mail gives one party an unfair advantage. So what vote by mail actually has been shown to do is increase voter turnout, right? It doesn't help either party. It just makes sure, it just ensures that everybody can vote safely. And especially the coronavirus is still here. As much as people want to be outside, like we are still in the midst of a pandemic. So if you get a ballot, you have a ballot in your hand, we ask that you just find the SEO, don't put it in the mail, but find the location. If you only can put it in the mail, put it in the mail this week to ensure that it gets there on time. Of course, applying, the only thing I want to note here is that the Department of State now, you can apply to vote by mail on the Department of State with just the last 4 digits of your social security number. Why is this important? This helps returning citizens, right? This helps people who may be just getting home from jail. They don't have the necessary IDs. They don't have any license, or my nephew turned 18 today. Doesn't have a state ID, right? So we're going to use his social security number to register him and have a signature match. This eliminates barriers. The state, maybe 6 weeks ago at this point, the state did not allow for social security numbers to be entered in as a way to apply. So now you can do it. That is a great thing. That is a win. People are able to do it. If you still want to fill out a paper application, feel free to do so. You can do that at a satellite election office or print it off, go to a library. Libraries are open and available and prepared to do this. So the earlier the better. Do not wait until October 27th. Of course, deadline November 3rd. And then as long as it's postmarked by the 3rd, you can do it. But of course, you can also drop it off at any satellite election office. It does not have to be in the district that you live in. So who's on the ballot? The president, obviously. The U.S. House, so those are your federal seats, PA Auditor, Attorney General, Auditor General, Treasurer, and the General Assembly. And then in Philadelphia specifically, we have 4 ballot questions. At the Committee of 70, we have a tool that kind of helps no matter where you are in the state of Pennsylvania, ballot.70.org. You'll enter your email address and you'll enter your actual address, and they'll pull up who is on the ballot where you live, right? And then we also do a great breakdown on the questions for you. Vote411.org is a resource. If you don't live in the state of Pennsylvania, it's for the state of Pennsylvania, but if you live in Jersey and Delaware, we have resources for what happens in your state as well. So here's a sample ballot. The big thing that we've been hearing is about secrecy envelopes. I'm gonna jump through. No naked ballots. Make sure you dress your ballot. You must have this outer envelope. That's the envelope closest to the coffee mug. That must be in with your ballot inside of the bigger envelope to ensure that your vote is counted, and you must sign it. Okay, so dress your ballot. We have a wonderful video. You'll see my face at the committee70.org where we are doing an explainer on how to dress your ballot. So change your mind or your dog ate your ballot. A lot of questions have been coming up about spoiling our ballots, right? Because we're nervous. You can do that. So any voter who needs a new ballot, one can go to a satellite election office or call the county officials on election day. But what you can also do with this pin in it that it will cause greater lines is you can go to your polling location that you're assigned to, find a judge of elections, and you can void your ballot. You can say, I don't want to vote on paper, I want to vote on a machine. They will give you an affidavit. You'll sign your life away and say that you have not committed voter fraud, and the fine print is there, and you'll be able to vote on a machine. But we are asking, if you're okay, to please just drop your ballot off to eliminate the lines that we know we will see. So, regrets, I've had a few, but then again, don't spoil your ballot. Okay, folks, just try, send them in, find a satellite election office. So election week is the new election day. Do not expect the typical build up to that night. You will only begin to receive polling location numbers across the state, across the country, and you will not begin to see mail-in ballot numbers. As it stands, there are 2.6 million mail-in ballots out across the state of Pennsylvania. In the state of Pennsylvania, we cannot begin to cure or pre-canvass our ballots until, as it stands right now, 7 a.m. on election day, which means that all the ballots that you receive are sitting right now in a location. They cannot be touched or processed or put in order to begin to be read by the machines until election day at 7 a.m. And that's going to take time. So we at the Committee of 70 are thinking it's going to be a strong week. Know that people are not going to be working 24/7. They'll work very, very long hours, but people have to go home. They have to eat. They're still humans. They have families. But we are encouraging and anticipating a strong week. So election protection, everybody knows 866-R vote. ACLU and Common Cause across the state of Pennsylvania have done a lot with training. Committee of 70, we've trained a ton of lawyers to just be ready and mobilized and out there on election day, and the law firms are giving them the time off. And then, of course, we know in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia specifically, we needed upwards of 8,500 poll workers. I know that we are to about the 1,000 mark, right, of needing that. All the other locations have been filled. But know that an election happens every 6 months, and people are going to realize this might not be what they want to do. So please continue to sign up to be a poll worker. And then, of course, some resources, vote riders that we encourage, returning citizens. They pay and they give the funds and the necessary IDs for voters. And then we have partnered with the school district to ensure that every eligible voter that is a student has received a paper application, since we haven't been able to have our traditional voter registration drive. So that's the end of what I have to say. It's comprehensive. I know it was really quick, but thank you.
Sorry about that, I was muted. Thanks, Ashley, that was so interesting. Really, really good, helpful, lots of information there. So I just wanna move on to the next part of our seminar here, and introduce the two reporters we have who have been covering elections in Pennsylvania. The first one, Adam Richter, is a digital news editor and columnist for the Reading Eagle in Reading, Pennsylvania. And he's been a journalist for 15 years. He often writes about the intersection of technology, news, and society. He received his bachelor's degree in philosophy and political science from the University of Pittsburgh, and he grew up in Berks County, where Reading is. So he's a hometown Reading guy. And he still lives there with his wife, daughter, and dog. And then we also have Jonathan Lay. He's a reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, where he focuses on voting and elections and uses data to explore these topics, including voting rights, gerrymandering, election security, demographics, voting patterns, and campaign finance. And he's the guy with all the books behind him. So I wanted to, I mean, the first, question I have, and one of the things that, I mean, I haven't done too much election coverage this year, but the election coverage that I have done, I was trying to ask people about fracking in the election, and nobody cared about fracking. They all cared about mail-in ballots. And a lot of people in Philadelphia thought, oh, I'm afraid to use it. It might not be counted. And then when I talked to people in rural Pennsylvania, they said, oh, it's going to be full of fraud. The election, that mail-in ballot is all about fraud. So, Adam, I just want to, start with you.
Yeah.
If you could talk to us about what you know in your reporting or what you've discovered as to where this information comes from. How do people get this kind of disinformation? And how does that figure into your, coverage of this election in your column?
That's a great question. What I've noticed is, and I just want to be clear, I'm not, I oversee our election coverage, but I don't actually do a lot of reporting necessarily. We have a great reporter, Karen Shoei, who does most of it. But what we found in her reporting and in other stories that we've done is that a lot of the misinformation comes from people who are on social media, and Facebook in particular becomes a great echo chamber for people to spread this kind of misinformation, and that seems to be where a lot of these myths are coming from, and it's become more incumbent on us to make part of our election coverage educational content that tells people this is how you vote, this is how you participate, especially in a year like this where mail-in balloting is going to be the most important way that people cast their ballots.
Right, and that's so interesting. And Jonathan, just to put it to you, I'm just curious, have you in your coverage seen anything change over the last couple months? Have you had to react to certain things people were telling you, and you're like, where did they get that from? And were you able to track it down and figure it out? I mean, if you could talk a little bit about the disinformation or misinformation you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, depending on which direction it's coming from, if we're talking about claims around fraud and mail-in ballots, it is really easy to track because of a lot of it is coming from the president, who is tweeting about it. He's, holding news conferences, and he's saying mail ballots are fraudulent. There's election rigging, right? Over and over the last several months, we've seen that attack going on. And so that's definitely fueling that side. And then on the other side, we do see it's harder, but Adam's right. Like on Facebook, we do see a lot of stuff now coming from the left where people are like, look, we don't know about these mail ballots anymore, not because they're fraudulent, but because we're worried about mail delivery. We're worried about who's going to, will the president declare victory before it's actually in? So now we're seeing stuff coming from the other side. It's scary. I will say we are seeing a lot of misinformation on both sides. Not that they're equal, but it's definitely flying around all over the place, coming from every direction.
Right. Yeah. No, I've talked to a lot of people who ordered mail-in ballots but are afraid to use them because, like you said, they're afraid that somehow they're not going to get counted. And I'm just wondering how, as a reporter covering this election, it must be so different. I don't know if you've covered other elections before, but it seems like in this case, you're not just trying to cover the typical election, like what are people thinking? What are the candidates saying? What are the differences in policy? But you have this whole other, stream of misinformation that you're battling, and this whole other story that you're like, well, how do I even tackle this? How are people, do you find that people are really coming to like the Reading Eagle or the Philadelphia Inquirer, or do you find that like most people are getting their news and information somewhere else? I mean, do you have a sense of that? Like how you battle that as a reporter, how you handle that?
So I actually am lucky. Since 2017, I've been on this beat, and I'm sort of specifically focused on voting rights and elections, meaning like election administration. So I'm on our politics team, but I don't cover campaigns and candidates. I really don't care who you vote for. I just care whether you vote and you have the ability to do so. So I sort of get lucky in that I don't have to split my time that way. This has sort of been my full-time focus. But things do change during election season versus the other months of the year, in that we do have to shift our focus a little bit to sort of a service orientation, right? We're not just covering what the news is, we're also doing things like helping people understand how to vote, where are the drop boxes, what does the law say, how can you vote? That is information that we're trying to put out there. And a lot of other places are too. And what we've seen is there's a good response to that. People are really interested in sort of high quality, credible information, because there's a lot of stuff on social media and stuff. And I will say this year, everything is changing so quickly that I think people are hungry for information that they can trust.
Have either of you seen anything that's really surprised you in terms of, you know, trying to suppress the vote for any group of people either way? Like, has anything jumped out as like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen? Is that Ashley? Did you want to talk? Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Ashley. Okay. I was gonna say, for us, not really. And we're at our coverage area is very specific. We primarily cover Berks County, Pennsylvania. So it's a small geographic area. But we haven't, at least I haven't heard, and our election team has not really talked about folks concerned about like suppressing the vote. I think like Jonathan said, a lot of the way that our coverage has changed is sort of becoming civics education, much more so than in past years. So we're not seeing too much paranoia about voter suppression. I do know, like, I monitor our Facebook page from time to time, and a lot of the comments will sometimes echo like the national talking points from the right wing or the left wing about whether fraudulent voting is going to be going on, or whether the mail is going to be insufficient is going to be tampered with, so people's votes can't be counted. But yeah, not a lot in terms of voter intimidation or that sort of thing.
What kind of advice do you have for people? So you can, lay out the rules. You can lay out, here's how you vote, here's where you can vote, here are the deadlines. But what do you tell people in terms of how they can distinguish between what's true and what's not?
Well, one thing that I've done in my column that I get to write every couple of weeks, I've actually started writing about that very topic. And how do you tell what is a good news source, and how do you tell what's a bad news source? And I wrote one column about that specifically, like, when you're reading a news story, what should you be looking out for? And because that will tell you, if you can answer these questions, it will tell you whether or not what you're reading is credible, or whether you should just throw it away with the trash. And so I think a lot of that, it didn't used to be the mission of newspapers to explain what they do to audiences. I shouldn't say just newspapers, but news organizations. It was always kind of taken for granted that everybody knew and everybody understood how journalism works. And what I've learned over the last couple of years, certainly in the last 2 years, is that we can't make those assumptions anymore. And if we're going to show readers that we have value and that they can, we can give them what they need to exist in society much more easily, we have to explain ourselves better. And we've never been very good at that, but we've been doing a lot more recently. And I think part of this voter education stuff, like writing stories about where you can drop off your ballot, how do you fill it in your ballot, that sort of thing, that's just as important as tackling some of the issues. Right.
And I just want to remind those who are listening in or watching us, if you've got questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the chat, and I will be happy to pass them on. But Jonathan, I wanted to throw it over to you. What do you think some of the issues are for voters? Where do you think some of the greatest levels of confusion are right now? And what's your biggest fear? You said earlier, oh, it's kind of scary. Like, I want to know, like, what's your fear? What are you afraid of?
What am I afraid of?
Right. In terms of like, what's your reporting? Why has your reporting led you to be fearful of what could happen in terms of voting during this election and after?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm afraid of is polling that says that all across the board, whatever your party, half or more of Americans are unsure about the integrity of the election and aren't sure they have confidence in the election. And that really freaks me out, that whoever wins, however that person wins, a significant number of people are not going to necessarily accept it as a legitimate outcome of the election, right? And that's because of concerns around election rigging or fraud or, voter suppression or whatever your concern is. A lot of people are not only anxious about how to vote, but are concerned about the legitimacy of the election. And that freaks me out. But it's not a conversation that I'm used to hearing from people about whether or not the election is legitimate in some way. That freaks me out. It really does, because it seems sort of foundational that yes, it's a flawed system, it's a messy system, it's run by humans, every county runs their own election at the same time all across the country, but we accept the results, we know how it's working. So that's what freaks me out. When it comes to what we're hearing from voters, it's all across the board in terms of anxiety. It's real anxiety all across the board on things like, I hear things about, I was freaking out about my envelope because of some minor thing, but they're worried about it. Or just today, I heard from 2 different colleagues who told me that they were filling out their mail ballots and they practiced their signatures separately. They told me they practiced their signatures for several minutes to make sure that they don't get thrown out. I mean, people are really worried about this. And that's scary too. Like anxiety is really high right now. And so that's something that I'm worried about also.
Right. And I saw, Ashley, you were shaking your head too. I'm just curious if you've heard from voters like that and what you've heard at the Committee of 70. I mean, I guess people sort of count on the Committee of 70 to give them unbiased information. And I'm just curious what people are telling you.
Yeah, so everything that Jonathan said, of course, but also what happens to our ballots, right? So people just never thought of it, right? And so they think that they go into some abyss, but there's always been like a system. So we've been doing a lot of explaining like, okay, your ballot gets delivered, it's dropped off, it's processed. There's literally a unique barcode. So walking people, to Adam's point, through those like basic steps of like what we assume is basic, but what people just don't know. We get a lot of questions from folks, and I'm actually doing something with Penn Memory Center tomorrow, right? Around family members who are disabled or homebound, or like, what does that look like? And that stuff is not explicit. We have had to go and do the work and pull the sheets from the state website to make sure that people are equipped, because on their own, they wouldn't find it. It's easy because I'm looking for it, right? So how do we make it accessible? We also are very much now in this moment at the Committee of 70 talking about, so what now what, right? So what is going, regardless of what happens, how do we meet the moment? Because somebody, no matter what side you fall on, will have a visceral reaction. And so how do we prepare for that? But how do we sit in that moment? Right. I think sometimes in 2016, we all kind of just went to our corners, and I don't think that was healthy for anybody. But how do we create a collective mental health space or just place in safe ground for like really, again, in those real moments, dispelling the myths, like this is what is actually happening at this moment with your ballot. Like nobody is pulling them out of a bucket and saying, I challenge them, because that actually cannot happen.
So you
right.
can trace, basically you can trace the fact that your ballot was counted. Right. Yeah. So that's really important information. I think people are really worried about that. But, and you mentioned something earlier that was sort of new to me. I'd never heard it. Instead of election day, you've got this concept of election week, right? We're not going to know. And that sort of dovetails with what Jonathan was saying, where you know, a lot of people aren't, you know, are talking about the fact that they were not going to trust the results of the election. And I'm just wondering if the anxiety and that trust will be eroded if people don't realize that we're not going to know that day or the next day. You're not going to wake up the next morning and hear, you know, on WHYY necessarily what the results were in Pennsylvania. It's going to take an entire week. And I'm just wondering, you know, Jonathan and Adam, you know, either one of you, like what have you guys done to prepare for covering that? Like how, because in the past we used to cover election day. It was like election night. I mean, I'm on radio. I'd have to do a live shot. I'd go to bed at like 2 in the morning and I'd wake up the next day and not have anything to do. And it was great. But it sounds like this is going to be different. So I'm just curious what the Inquirer and what the Reading Eagle is doing to prepare for that week. And either one of you, I mean, Adam, if you want to go first, and then Jonathan, either one.
Sure, I'll go first. We actually have put a web page on our site that tells people how we're covering the election, which we've never done before. But again, this year it seems necessary to let people know. And one of the sections on the page explains we will not know who the winners are on election night because of the high proportion of mail-in ballots, because of all the absentees, and just because we're in the middle of a pandemic. You know, we will not have results, and it also outlines how we're going to call races, and which is basically, you know, we're not going to call them based on exit polling. We're going to call the national races based on whatever the Associated Press reports. And as for the local races, we're waiting until all the precincts have weighed in. And I think that, again, that's important to do, because especially when people conflate all media with cable news, and cable news operates under a different set of rules and procedures sometimes than people in print or digital or radio. And I think that's really important to let people know, like, how we're going to do it and why we're going to be holding back to call races. You know, it's not going to be election night. It may not be for, you know, days or weeks later.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how about you, Jonathan? What's the Inquirer planning?
Well, we've been planning, and we're still not exactly sure because it seems like things keep changing. I think similar to what Adam is doing, it's trying to just wrap a lot of context and explanation around what we do and don't know. We at one point thought about, do we even put results at all? Like, I will tell you, in the primary, we didn't have results on election night. We did not release them, including in the next day's paper. But we decided it's November 3rd, 2020, like, the information's out there. And if people are going to get the information, we'd rather it be wrapped within our responsible context. So we're going to try. But also, I will say things keep changing. Like, at this point, first of all, I would be really surprised if we didn't know who won by the end of the week. I really would. Counties keep buying new equipment. Like, every time I call a new county, they have a new high-speed scanner. Like, they keep buying equipment. They keep getting more staff. Just yesterday, I was talking to 2 counties who told me they think they're going to have all their ballots counted by Wednesday morning, like 1 a.m. Wednesday morning, like a few hours after the polls close. And I was like, that seems a little crazy to me, but they are promising it. So, you know, I think it's weird. We really don't know what to expect. So we're going to tell people that, but we're also at the same time having to plan for multiple different outcomes at the same time, right? Because there's the possibility that, for example, we don't know who won Pennsylvania, but I don't know, somebody wins, you know, Joe Biden wins Florida and like Arizona, you know, like Texas, Georgia, you know, and then we're like, all right, Pennsylvania, like, nobody needs us, right? So, like, we just don't know at this point, and we are going to tell people that we don't know and explain to them over and over why we don't know.
Right. And I mean, honestly, I think that's just as important as a science reporter. It's important to tell people what you don't know and why. So I think that you're right, that sort of applies to elections here. And you said you had Jonathan, you said you had a response. There's a somebody in the chat, Leroy, saying that it was very reassuring to receive an email the day after I dropped off my ballot telling me that it was accepted. And I guess that comes from the Department of State.
Yeah, that comes from the Department of State's SURE system. And if you sign up, when you sign up for your application, you could put your email address and they'll send you emails along the way. So they'll tell you like your application has been processed, you know, your ballot has been mailed out to you. I will say, in keeping with the spirit of talking about misinformation, that's kind of misinformation. Not because it hasn't been received, but because, as Ashley said, your ballot can't be counted. It can't be dealt with. It's pre-canvassed, we call it, until 7 a.m. on election day. So every ballot that's coming back right now, they're marking it in the system and everybody's getting these emails, but it's telling them that they're accepted. And if you go on the website and you use the ballot tracker that Ashley talked about earlier, it will literally say vote recorded. That is not true. Your vote is not recorded, right? They will open some of these and the number of them will be naked ballots and they will be thrown out. But people right now believe their vote has been recorded when it hasn't. They've not been opened, they've not been checked, they haven't looked at your signatures, all of that. So, and you know, misinformation, not intentional disinformation, it's just the Department of State, you know, not a great system, you know, the language is bad, but it's one of those things that I kind of worry about because they've also sent out other kinds of emails with similar language that's not great, and people get really confused by it.
Right. So in an attempt to be clear, oftentimes there's confusion.
Yeah. I mean, Leroy's not wrong. His ballot has been received, right? It's been received. It's locked up. It's, you know, it's secure. But I just worry about the Department of State just sending out these emails to everyone, telling people like your vote's been recorded and this and that. And I don't know. I don't want to freak people out either. Like, Leroy, I'm sure your ballot is fine. I'm sure you're good. I just also don't want misinformation in the other direction of everybody thinking everything is fine when it's just not necessarily true.
Jonathan, have you thought about writing a story, like explaining all of that?
Stay tuned Friday morning.
All right.
I had another piece.
We will look for it.
Yeah, a question that we get from Jonathan, well, to Jonathan, but that we get on the C70 side. We use this term very loosely in Pennsylvania called early voting. We do not actually vote early, right? So early voting means like you go to a machine and your vote is counted in that moment. There's no such thing as early voting in the state of Pennsylvania, and people are beginning to catch on because they're like, my friends are voting. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't happen here. And we have to begin to like shift that language because people are realizing like, no, I didn't really vote early and it should be called something differently.
Got it. Right. Because other states do have actual early voting. Yeah. Ashley, just wanted to follow up because part of the question that was sent here was a question directed to you about how you're going to address election week with the communities that you work with. I mean, what are you expecting to happen, and what kind of things are you as the Committee of 70 planning that week?
So for the week, one, we are still in the mix of like, what does it look like 20 days out? Because as Jonathan noted, things are flying very fast. You can make 5 million plans and they change, right? But I will say we are rooted in correct information. We are rooted in looking behind the curtain, right? So a lot of the work that we do will be like, what is happening as your ballot is being counted? Do you actually know the process so that you're not frustrated? Do you actually know what a poll watcher is, right? Is the poll monitor an actual thing that is legal, right? So that's a lot of the work that we'll be doing that week as people are paying attention to like, somebody's gonna walk in to where the ballots are stored and challenge 5,000 of them. Impossible, right? That actually cannot happen and it will not happen. But stranger things have happened. So we're prepping for different scenarios. We're prepping for challenges. We wouldn't be surprised if things happen or play out in court. So yeah, that's a lot of work. But again, a lot is just happening really, really fast.
Right.
Faster than I think any of us could have imagined. And this is Murphy's Law. Anything that can happen literally will happen in the next 20 days.
And it's also been 2020, right? That's
Yeah.
around 2020. But there's Leroy has a follow-up that perhaps one of you can answer. Then the question is, does that mean the security envelope was opened and now the naked envelope with his ballot is in a stack somewhere waiting to be opened and counted on election day? Or what does the email that he got mean?
Yeah. So Leroy, when you've next to your name on your ballot, and even if you still have your first envelope that it came in because you didn't send that one back, there's a little barcode next to your name on your envelope. That barcode, there it is over there. Flip it and on your ballot. That's the barcode. I think there's one on the back, but don't show us your address. That little barcode is there next to your name, and that's what they scanned in. So it has not been opened. Okay. So it has not been opened yet. So nobody knows what your ballot looks like. Nobody knows if it's naked. I hope you dressed it. Please say you dressed it. But the barcode is there. So that's how it's been scanned in.
And we have another question here, and that is, can anyone talk about any public information about how many ballots are rejected on the week, on election week? Like, how will we know how many, or will we know how many were rejected? And I guess will individuals know if their individual ballot was rejected? Does anyone know that answer to that question?
In theory, yes. So as Ashley said, they scan the envelope, right, to say that it's been accepted. They're going to scan them again before they actually start opening them. And so let's say, for example, on the back, I've signed mine. Let's say I haven't signed mine and it has to be rejected because it's missing a signature. They will mark that in the system. They will send all of those through into the short system, and I will receive an email that says my ballot has been rejected because it's missing a signature. Or same thing for if my ballot arrives after the deadline, I will receive an email that says my ballot was rejected for arriving after the deadline. That's not necessarily in real time, however, because again, the counties are moving so quickly to just count as many ballots as possible that a lot of times what will happen is, so a lot of counties have these giant machines, like these Blue Crest machines are literally 40 feet long, and they sort all the ballots. And part of what they'll do is they'll take all the ones that might be naked ballots, for example, or missing a signature, and they'll just put them aside and they'll deal with them later. Like they'll do like the paperwork housekeeping of like scanning ballots into the system later so that they can count all the ballots that they can count as soon as possible. So we won't necessarily have data in real time that is actually matching what's going on. I will also say that we won't in real time necessarily even know how many ballots are left to be counted because of what Ashley said about normally the deadline is 8 p.m. on election day, but now it's been extended by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to say postmarked by election day, received by 5 p.m. on Friday. So on Tuesday night, we won't even know how many are coming in Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And Pennsylvania has always allowed military and overseas voters, who we call our UOCAPA voters, to turn their ballots in by the Tuesday after election day. So the unofficial results that we're getting all week long are really going to be a little messy, not because they're wrong, but just because we don't have all the complete information. Certification of the vote does take 3 weeks.
Right. And yeah, I mean, and so that does present a challenge as a reporter, how do you report on something that, you're trying to give people accurate information, but that accurate information could suddenly change. So that's a challenge, and can, both of you sort of talk about that challenge? Like how do you handle that? Adam? We haven't heard from you. You're muted. Oh, there you go.
Okay. Sorry. I thought Jonathan would want to go first. Again, it's a matter of being upfront with readers and letting them know what we do know and what we don't know, right up front. And probably on election day, we'll tell people, look, this is when we're going to get results. And we always make the expectation that the certification of the results doesn't happen for a few weeks out. But I think it's going to be really important for us to tell people on election day, don't expect results tonight. Don't expect results maybe even this week, because we're just not going to have them for for a while, and it's put us kind of in a tough position because we are used to like on election night at least having like some kind of feed of live results from the county or maybe even from the state, and I'm not sure how much value that's going to have this year because so little of the votes going to be counted, and I'm not sure it's going to. I question whether it'd be worth it for us to do that, just because it's going to be so incomplete on election night. It might be better to just wait until we get the fuller picture.
Right. Yeah, it'll be a strange election night because usually I'm at somebody's campaign headquarters, so
Yeah.
I don't know what they're going to look like election night.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and is there anything that, I mean, one of the things that a lot of people are wondering is, I think who I've spoken to who've gotten one of these ballots is like, should I just go to the polls instead of mail it in? I mean, or drop it off. I don't know if Ashley or Jonathan or Adam or any of you have any advice on that, because I think that's something that a lot of people are thinking about right now.
I would say, sorry, go ahead, Jonathan. I'll defer to you.
I think it was Ashley.
Oh, Ashley, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So we are asking people to utilize satellite election offices, and drop them off. You have a drop box in your county. Most counties have. You can still drop it off at like your city hall across all 67 counties here in the state of Pennsylvania. Spoiling your ballot is going to cause massive lines on top of the lines that we already know will be in place. Like I said, every county has brand new poll workers.
And when you say spoiling your ballot, what does that mean?
That means that you want to avoid it, right? So you have the ballot in your hand. Jonathan wants to say, okay, I don't want to drop it off. I don't want to put it in the mail. I know I can legally go and vote on a machine. You're going to walk to a judge of elections and say exactly what I just said. I don't want to vote by mail anymore. I want to vote on a machine. So spoiling it means that the judge of elections takes it from you. You sign an affidavit, and then you are able to vote on a machine, right? Mm-hmm. That causes a line that pulls the judge of election outside of the line that's already there, right? We know different communities are not going to just systematically don't trust the system that has never worked for them. So they're not even applying to vote by mail, right? But you probably will call a longer line. You have new judges of elections, a ton of poll workers who don't know the law, like it's in their training. Committee of 70 put together kind of a box and a comprehensive piece for them that they'll all receive on election day. Mm-hmm. But at 3 o'clock, when the line is out the door, what happens, right? And if we know that they can be dropped off at a satellite election office, like eliminate the postal service, like let's forget it, right? Drop it off at a drop box. Every single county has one. Go to your county office. Just do that, because you don't want to, we want to like flatten like the curve or flatten the election line. Take yourself out of that space, because it could mean that somebody else will actually vote. What we don't want is like 12 o'clock on election day, seeing news cameras at these massive lines, and that discourages somebody from going.
Got it. Right.
Just because they don't want to stand in line.
Right. That's so interesting. And Jonathan, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, I want to give the optimistic counterpoint to what Ashley said. I'm not sure I necessarily expect long lines on election day, including in Philadelphia. I think the optimistic case for that would be, look, maybe 3 million people will have already voted by mail. And those are not people who are going to be at the polling places. Unlike in the June primary, we're not consolidating our polling places, as Ashley said. Philly will have 800 something, just as it usually does. We have a lot of poll workers. Like, counties are actually telling us like we have too many poll workers and they're building reserves in, because all these third-party organizations, like you go on Instagram and it's like, oh yeah, I'll sign up to be a poll worker. So actually counties are telling us they have a lot of poll workers. They're never trained well enough. The training is never good enough. But at least we're not seeing poll worker shortages. I think for sure we will see lines, but the lines will be at 7 a.m. as they always are when people are lined up for the polls to open. For sure we will see lines around 8 p.m. when the polls are closing, and that's when lines always form. I don't personally expect lines except when something is going wrong. And something will go wrong. Let's be clear, something will go wrong. A machine will malfunction. Something will be, like in the primary, Philadelphia will send the wrong machine to the wrong place, and so people aren't able to use it. That kind of thing will happen. I'm not necessarily sure I believe that, a flood of voters is going to create the lines. And I'm not sure that's necessarily what we've seen elsewhere or even in Pennsylvania in the past either. And so I'm sort of hoping that we don't. But at the same time, I guess the other piece of that is a lot of elections officials have been dropping like flies in Pennsylvania, including in Berks County. So, I mean, Debbie Olivieri left a few weeks ago. So I do worry a little bit about that piece of it, given that, the ability to respond on election day, if the people aren't super experienced, might be a challenge.
Right.
But I would like to optimistically believe that Ashley's wrong and everything's going to go great.
Okay. Just before, we're getting up to the 8 o'clock, but I just wanted to put in one more question there from somebody who's listening in, and their question is, now everyone has a phone in their pocket and can act as a source of information for their communities or families and heighten emotions around elections, what would be your advice to people so that they don't spread disinformation about the elections? Can anyone talk about that? Adam, is that's something that you've written about?
Oh yeah, I have 4 words: read before you share. It is so easy to look at a headline on Twitter or Facebook or just like in your news feed and get outraged by it, and then think you have to tell everybody else about it. And before you know it, you've shared it, and several hours later, or even several minutes later, the story doesn't bear out.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important for us as journalists, to get the right information out to people, but it's also important for readers to know how to read a story and know whether what they're reading is based in reality or not. And if it's not, then they have to be responsible enough to say, I'm not sharing this. This is not true. It has too many red flags. So that would be my advice. Read with skepticism and don't share automatically.
Right. That's very good advice. And so we're just we're just almost at 8 o'clock. So time to wrap this up. And I just want to thank everybody who joined us today, and thanks for your great questions. Thanks, Ashley, for all that wonderful information. And I'm sure if people have more questions, they can contact the Committee of 70 or go on their website. It's a great website. Also want to thank Adam and Jonathan, both great reporters. If you haven't had a chance to go and read their work, I would encourage you guys to do so. And you can share their work confidently. And thanks for PEN America for hosting this. And I just wanted to give a shout out to their website. It's real easy, pen.org. That's www.pen.org. If you want more information about elections in Pennsylvania and election misinformation and disinformation in general, please check out that wonderful website. So thanks, everybody, and have a great night, and make sure you vote. Bye-bye.
See ya.